This just into CNN. Boeing has found yet another issue with some of its grounded 737 MAX jets. The FAA says the company has discovered that part of a system on the wings called the leading edge slat tracks, I'm quoting now, may have been improperly manufactured, end quote. The problem affects nearly 180 737 MAX planes, as well as more than 130 737 NG aircraft worldwide. The FAA released a statement saying in part, quote, the affected parts may be susceptible to premature failure or cracks resulting from the improper manufacturing process, although a complete failure of a leading edge slat track would not result in the loss of the aircraft. A risk remains that a failed part could lead to aircraft damage in flight. Let's bring in Mary Schiavo, former Inspector General for the U.S. Department of Transportation. And we should note that she also represents families of the victims of the Ethiopian Airlines 737 MAX that crashed after takeoff in March. All right, Mary, so what are your thoughts on that statement, this discovery, the revealing of, et cetera?
Well, again, it's a problem in manufacturing, assembly, and inspection. Now, this is a part of the wing. People will recognize it probably more from the sound than the sight, and this is something that's extended on takeoff to give your plane more lift. So your plane will hang in the air, if you will, better than you could get performance out of the plane otherwise. So it's a very important part of the plane for takeoff, especially, but it's not directly related to the MCAS, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System that we've heard so much about and what grounded the planes. But whenever you have a manufacturing defect or a design defect that can cause any part of the plane to crack or fail, you do have the risk that that part could separate from the aircraft, that the aircraft would not perform properly on that very important part of the flight, takeoff and climb out. So it's yet another bad setback for Boeing. It's fortunate they reported it to the FAA, and the operators have just 10 days to fix it, because this does apply to planes other than the grounded planes. It applies to other 737s. So yet another bad blow for Boeing. Getting it fixed in 10 days is crucial.
Wow. So you agree with their statement where they says it may not necessarily, that kind of crack wouldn't necessarily lead to the failure of the plane, but it could lead to, damage of the aircraft. So
that's right.
Okay. All right. So do you feel like Boeing is able to recover, with this aircraft, this design, even with these now voluntary statements, but particularly after the crashes of 737 MAX 8s? How does Boeing convince the public about corrections when you're talking about life and death and these aircraft?
Well, I think Boeing has to rely on two things. One is that Boeing is a very large company. They have huge U.S. government contracts. They're in the space program. They provide defense capabilities and planes. So Boeing as a company will survive. But this particular plane, it now has such a bad reputation, the 737 MAX. Even though this particular problem goes to other planes, I really think that the image of the MAX 8 and the MAX 9 potentially are so damaged that Boeing probably will, over time, though they say they're bringing it back out, they'll have to call it something else or phase it into a different program, because people are going to be skittish about this for a long time. However, that being said, when you book a flight on an aircraft, on an airplane, you can be very picky and say, I don't want to be on this plane, and book your flight just how you want to go. But if you show up to the airport and there's a different airplane sitting there and it's the 737 MAX 8, you have no rights to refuse it. You can say, I'm not going to go, I'm going to lose my money, but the airline can use whatever equipment it wants.
Yeah, and as a result, now a lot of travelers are a lot more mindful about the type of plane that they are willingly getting on. Mary Schiavo, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
CNN has learned that Boeing's proposal to get its fleet of 737 MAX planes back in the air does not involve hands-on simulator training for pilots, only a computer-based program. The jets were grounded following two deadly plane crashes where this anti-stall system, the MCAS, is being investigated as a possible cause. And Drew Griffin has been working on this story for us for some time now. What are you learning about this aspect of it, Drew?
First of all, Boeing and the FAA both tell us, look, at the final proposal, Brianna, the final training, the final software system is not ready yet and hasn't been proposed just yet. But What we do know is Boeing has gone around talking to pilots based in the U.S., pilots associations, and presenting what they would say we want for the retraining of this aircraft before you get it back up in the air. That does not involve any time in a simulator. Instead, it has this online training or iPad training or computer-based training that the pilots would go through fairly in short order before they are allowed to get back up in the plane. Pilots are split on that. Many say that's adequate to us. Some want more training manual information, checklist manual, but by and large are buying into the fact that getting that 737 MAX back up in the air may not require them to get into a simulator just for that purpose.
So they say it's not, Boeing's argument here is that it's not necessary, right? But this also will save money.
It will certainly save the airlines money and time. Simulator time is expensive, and it takes a long time to get your fleet pilots through those systems. Boeing, remember when they had this 737 MAX initially, didn't want to have any simulator time because of that. What Boeing is saying is that the software fix takes care of a lot of the problems in this plane. You won't need to be retrained on it. What the pilots are telling us is we already train in our regulator simulator training for things like runaway trim, and because of this software fix, the other problem of MCAS repeatedly kicking in and pushing the plane down no longer exists. So really, in essence, from the pilots, they're saying, what would we be retraining for? It's stuff we already do.
Drew Griffin, thank you.
What's happening right now is that Boeing says they fixed this, and they're waiting for the FAA to certify that the 737 MAX is once again safe for commercial air travel in the United States. Of course, those planes were grounded around the world earlier this year after that second deadly crash. With us now is former FAA safety inspector and CNN safety analyst David Susi. Okay, David, the fundamental question is, you had Muhlenberg, the CEO, there admitting in another part of the interview, public confidence has been hurt.
Yes, sir.
So how should the public know that Boeing has done enough to actually fix this for good when it is the same agency certifying that this time around? Again, it's just going to be Boeing and the FAA saying we're good to go.
Well, that's a really good point, Poppy, because it's omitted from the interview anything to do with what's going to happen tomorrow that's different than what happened yesterday. And right. that is crucial, and that's the point that's being missed right now. Yeah, sure. I believe that the 737 MAX 8 MCAS system is working properly. But the question that's not being answered clearly, and what's not being said, is what caused it to miss, how'd they miss this in the first place? Their systems are designed to catch these kinds of things and to not under-qualify or underestimate the damages that these types of systems could cause. And that lies the entire issue, the main problem. And I don't think they're addressing that.
I'd like to ask you the question that Nora O'Donnell there asked the Boeing CEO, because this is the crucial one. Would you put your family on this plane knowing that, yes, okay, Boeing says it's addressed this, but as Poppy said, through the same standard that they previously met, and that failed to keep the plane safe because the FAA and Boeing said, oh, we fixed it between the crashes and then there was another deadly crash. So why should I feel confident that I could put my family on that plane?
Jim, you asked me this question the day after that Ethiopian accident, and I said unequivocally that I would not let my granddaughter or family fly on that airplane. I've been involved in the fixes and the tests and everything that's gone on so far, and I would probably do it, but with hesitation. I've never been in this situation before. I've even lost confidence in it. As much as I know about what's going on in the safety and the systems that are in place, I really hate to say this, Jim, but I'm still hesitant about it until something is addressed that says, look, we misclassified this, and here's what we're going to do to make sure we don't miss this again. And I haven't heard those words yet. So at this point, no, I still wouldn't be comfortable with it.
You know, David, one thing that one of our other contributors here, Mary Scavo, has pointed out is that she believes that the FAA relies too much on the aircraft manufacturers for saying everything is good to go, right? The FAA relies too much on the experts at Boeing to say the science is right, this is good, we're good to go. Do you share that concern?
No, not completely. That's something that's been in place forever. The fact that Experts can be called in. There's no possible way that I know of. It would cost, estimates say, up to $2 billion a year to try to staff the kind of people that would do this. And the problem is, what happens when you're not certifying an airplane? Then you've got to lay all those people off. So it's not government's role to do that. The government's role is to make sure that they're classifying that the systems that they have in place and the delegations they have in place are working properly. That's the failure for the FAA. The fix is not to go hire a bunch of engineers to have that responsibility. The responsibility is clearly there. Now, one point I did want to make at this point is that they're still waiting for the FAA to approve this. They have not even submitted anything to the FAA yet.
Yeah, it'll take a while. David,
former FAA inspector there saying, and he's been involved in this, in the aftermath, saying he probably would not consider it safe to go on that plane. That's remarkable.
It is remarkable. David, thank you for the expertise this morning. We'll stay on this.
We're back now to discuss the new issue that is facing Boeing, and that includes problems on the wings of 737 jets. I want to talk now with former FAA safety inspector David Soucy. And David, it's a part that is called the leading edge slat on the wing. What does this do exactly?
Well, it's part of what we call the secondary flight control system. It's not primary, so Boeing's saying it's not that big a deal going on right now. But what it does is it reshapes the wing, allowing it to fly at a lower altitude or lower speed, and like during takeoff or landing, so that the wing allows the pilot to have more control over the aircraft. That's really what this slat does on the front of the wing.
The New York Times did this expose recently of the Boeing plant in South Carolina that made the Dreamliner. A whistleblower exposed shoddy manufacturing processes there. When you're looking at Boeing now, this company-wide, does it have an endemic problem with the way it is building airplanes and quality control?
You know, I think it's too early to say that. I did inspections on aircraft manufacturing companies and airlines for 18 years with the FAA. It's not uncommon to find certain things, particularly when they're under the microscope right now, and there's things that are going to come up and be issues. To determine whether it's systemic or endemic, that would take a lot more data, a lot more information. But right now there are issues of concern, and whether Boeing's responding appropriately, that's really what the next step to determine right now.
Well, what do you think as you're watching? You have this issue with the slats, right? I think part of this is it's not happening in a vacuum, right? You've got the MCAS system, which they're now saying that things are they're correcting the issue there, and that pilots are prepared, but they're not doing any flight simulator time for that. What do you think about Boeing's response here? What do you think about liability issues for Boeing?
Well, those are two separate questions. I'll address the first one, which is that is there a problem? Is there something going on within Boeing and allowing these things to continue to happen? I believe there is. And what I believe is going on is that if looking at their responses, I think they're miscalculating or classifying issues. Let's just take this flap track or this slat track issue. The slat track, they're saying, well, it can't bring down an aircraft. Even if it failed completely, it wouldn't bring down an aircraft. Well, I was looking earlier, in 2007, a 737 was crashed. It was a China Airlines, and it landed safely, but then broke out into a fire because this slat track stop mechanism, which is at the end of the slat track, had broken loose and punctured a hole in the slat track can. So that can ruptured into a fuel cell. The fuel cell spilled out and caused a fire and destroyed that aircraft. Luckily, no one was killed on that accident. However, what this tells me is when they're addressing the impact, what could happen, they're really preemptively saying, well, what could happen is this, but don't worry about it. The fact is, there is a risk. There is a risk that if that slat track is not properly heat treated, it would crack, and that stop, which is the same stop on the China Airlines, would have come loose and got wedged in that can and causing a fuel leak. So they're not assessing the impact of what happens. Likelihood of this is very rare, I agree with that, but when you're comparing likelihood with impact of what could happen if it happened, this still falls in my estimation as something that's safety critical. They're giving them 10 days to inspect it. That's not sufficient to me.
What is sufficient, really quickly, if you can add?
Oh, I think all of the aircraft that have these on there need to be inspected immediately before the next flight.
All right, David Soucy, thank you so much.